Well, good morning, everybody. Let me add my thanks to Charlie and William, first of all. I'm sure, like everyone, every time you hear a story, there's something in it that resonates personally, and that's the point that I think we want to spend the next hour or so talking about. So briefly to introduce myself before I introduce our guests. So I'm I was recently appointed a trustee of the AJR, and I'm very honoured to do that. I've been involved with the Holocaust Educational Trust for many years, so I'm acutely aware of the value of telling stories, telling personal stories, and I am myself the son of survivors, so I get much of what I heard in the last hour. So what we're going to do over the next hour, we have 3 organizations that are dedicated to sharing stories. As the baton passes to the next generation, we thought it would be helpful to hear what different organizations do, to compare and contrast, to learn some lessons. And so we've got a few things that we're going to discuss. Our 3 guests today, and we're delighted to welcome them. I'll let them introduce themselves properly. Helen Stone is from an organization called Generation to Generation, based down in London and the Southeast. Ernie Hunter, the Northern Holocaust Education Group, clue in the title there, and Claire Singerman, Gathering the Voices, based in Glasgow. So what I'll do is I'll get everyone to introduce themselves. Then we've got a few questions, a few topics that we're going to discuss about telling our family stories. And then hopefully we'll allow a little bit of time towards the end of the hour to deal with any questions. So without further ado, I'm just looking at my screen. So Helen, would you like to talk a little about what Generation to Generation does?
Right. Thank you, Mike. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for inviting Generation to Generation to be part of this important event. As you can see from my label, I'm Helen Stone, and I'm the co-chair of G2G, which is how we refer to Generation. We became a recognized charity in January 2020. You may well be wondering, why do we need yet another Holocaust organization? And what's so special about G2G? Well, we focus exclusively on training and preparing the children, the grandchildren, and the friends of Holocaust survivors to tell their family stories. In the past year, we've grown at an astonishing rate, and our initial cohort of just 5 speakers has now been increased to 20 and is continuing to grow. Most of our accounts have never been told before and may have been known only to the families, and sometimes not even to them, until research has brought them to light. Since 2019, our speakers have presented to at least 12,000 people in schools, civic groups, universities, synagogues, churches, and at our regular online events. So who are our target audience? Well, although we do speak to adult groups, our prime target is young people in secondary schools. A survivor giving a first-hand account has immense authenticity. We can't offer them exactly that, but we can create something almost as powerful by using all the tools at our disposal, such as recorded testimony, both sound and video, old photos of people and places, film of events, artifacts, diaries, letters, documents, newspaper articles, and much more. Using multimedia, we've been able to create presentations that are fully engaging for young people who, as you well know, don't always have such a long attention span. We weave together moving personal stories and historical facts. But this isn't just a history lesson. It's the tale of an individual caught up in one of the most terrible periods of persecution ever witnessed. We try to arouse the emotions of our listeners and create empathy and understanding of what it means to be seen as other and to be the subject of discrimination and prejudice. And we make sure that we refer not only to Jews, but also to other groups who've suffered similarly. We feel a weight of responsibility to ensure that these important, largely untold stories, personal stories, are preserved for future generations. They can teach us so much about prejudice, cruelty, and the dangers of a totalitarian state, but also about courage and resilience in the face of unimaginable horror, and indeed about moral values. They're also an important tool for promoting tolerance and combating Holocaust.
So
I encourage you to support us in any way that you feel you can. Thank you.
thank you, Helen. I'll move straight on to Claire. Please tell us a bit about what you do, your organisation does.
I second that. Thank you so much for inviting us. All the things that Helen said really are behind what we're doing, so I don't need to repeat that. But we come at a different angle. We've been in existence since about 2009. And what we wanted to do was to collect stories of people who sadly we knew were aging, make them freely available and available on the net. We saw the future as being very much a digital future. And I'm afraid COVID has confirmed that that's probably going to be the case. So we collected the stories, we've put them on the net, we've made them available without charge. In addition to that, because our availability is so easily seen, I can give you some numbers as well. We've been seen over Scotland by well over 32,000 pupils, about 23,000 adults, 41,000 visitors to the website. We tweet regularly, and we found that's creating a lot of interest, and we're being followed by most of the major Holocaust institutions, and that's been very helpful. We were one of the first groups to be part of the European Holocaust research infrastructure, and again that's given us a lot of importance. One of the things that we wanted right from the beginning was to ensure that the people we were interviewing were not seen as victims. It's terribly easy for a child to say the Jews must have done something. That's a huge danger, we've always thought. So we've tried very hard to put the stories into a context of normal people living very ordinary lives before the Holocaust, and people who have done amazing things for Scotland, from producing children to somebody like Henry Wooga, who I know is watching this, who has helped injured soldiers for many years to learn to ski bob. All these things we wanted to include in what we've done. One last thing to say, we've had close relationships with so many people who've given their time and energy very freely to us, even though we're just 6 people as the association. And one of the greatest links we've had is with the Glasgow Caledonian University, which has brought students into helping us and working with us and so on. So as with Helen, we care very, very strongly. And we hope we're making some sort of difference here.
We'll come and talk about that in a minute. Thank you, Claire. Ernie.
Hello, and again, thank you for inviting me. And if I can actually echo all that the preceding speakers have said, particularly Helen of G2G, we're the new boys on the block. Northern Holocaust Education Group decided to set itself up with perfect timing, just as COVID was about to start. So we're actually developing a lot, and as Helen has said, we need an awful lot of help, but we're doing exactly the same, or pretty much the same as G2G. Perhaps one can say one of the differences is that we also have first generation people as members of NHEG, because they're the real McCoy on that. And what we're trying to do is keep that testimony alive. And in doing that, we are encouraging, particularly obviously the second and third generation, to bring their stories to the fore. And in that sense, we offer, whether you call it a mentoring or a buddying system, to help them do the research, etc., to bring those stories to the fore. And as Helen has said, critical is that the content is engaging and enriching, and that the delivery is also engaging. And we help with that, so that those stories are not forgotten. And many of them, as Helen has said, have not been brought to the fore. Living in the north, in the middle between Scotland and obviously London, one always feels that so much is London-centric, and we therefore have developed the Northern Holocaust Education Group, which, for those who have got a geographical mind, starts in North Wales, and then from Liverpool through Manchester, Huddersfield and Leeds, a bit north of that, a bit south of that. Our target audience is very similar to G2G, local authorities, schools, synagogues and the like. And when we're talking of schools, we're looking at students of 15 plus really, as opposed to younger than that. And we have people who also are victims of Nazi persecution, if I can make a very fine distinction here. In other words, people who are not Jewish, because the Holocaust has a tight definition of victims, Jewish victims of Nazi persecution. So we cover a wide and interesting area. We are currently, for obvious reasons, using Zoom, or less favorably Microsoft Teams. But in the north, certainly people would prefer face-to-face, and forward bookings are always face-to-face if possible. And that has a huge advantage, because many of our people not only have an engaging story, but have artifacts, etc. One of the difficulties is, how do you explain the Holocaust? Talking of 6 million is in many ways, I'm sorry to use the word, less meaningful than taking an individual and positioning them within the 6 million, within the context of that. And in that way, we're actually very keen, because as with G2G, our focus really is on schools, and we prefer non-Jewish schools. When we go to Jewish schools and synagogues, etc., yes, that is important to us, but it's important to explain that the reasons we're giving for this story is, yes, to do with anti-Semitism, but to take the lessons further forward in terms of discrimination generally, to try and minimize discrimination and how people look at the other, as it's called. So to us, the importance of taking these forward is to prevent, minimize discrimination generally. And in fact, from a personal point of view, until COVID, I used to go to Germany, to my mother's hometown of Laupheim, and taught there. And the important thing is, I'm not actually that particularly religious, to be honest with you, but whenever I go there, I always put my kippah on, particularly in Germany, so that for the first time, they knowingly, they may unknowingly, but knowingly see a Jewish person, which also is an important element when one is in non-Jewish environment, that we are the same, everybody is the same as well. And that's an unspoken thing that happens. So we try also for a cooperative approach. We don't see ourselves in competition with people. We feel together we are more powerful than separately. And in that respect, I really want to put a big word of thank you to Helen and G2G, who have been hugely helpful in helping us set up NHEG. But also we work with the Huddersfield Holocaust Education and Learning Centre. That's part of Huddersfield University. We're developing links, or hope to develop links, with the National Holocaust Centre. You'll know it better perhaps as Bet Shalom, and very many other such organisations. Together, it's more important. We are not in competition, and we are happy for people to wish to join us, where we will help them with the story, but it's more than that. There are support areas that are also very helpful. So if people feel they have a skill that can help us, we are jealous, for example, of the Glasgow Gathering the Voices and their IT side. And so people with IT skills to help us on that, that would be fabulous, and so on. So I hope that gives a thing. I really want to say that we model ourselves in many ways on what Helen has said, but we do include first generation, and we work as closely as we can with so many other organisations, Manchester University, etc. Thank you.
Thank you all. So can I kick off with a question? And if I can address it to Helen first, only because you and your organisation have been at this the longest. Clearly this passing of a baton down the generations, do you find you have a different impact when it's second, third generation speakers telling the stories of their family compared with first generation?
Yes, inevitably, it's going to be different. It's, as I mentioned in my introduction, you know, you can't replace the direct impact of a first generation survivor who was there and who can tell you that story, you know, from their own personal experience. But you can do something else which has its own huge impact. And because we are not first generation, in a sense, we have to work much harder in order to make that genuine impact on our audiences. And we are fortunate to live in an age when we have technical tools to help us. As I mentioned before, you know, we use everything at our disposal. You know, PowerPoint is an amazing tool. And, you know, we can show video film and have voices behind the video film commenting. We can show old photos. We can show snippets of diaries and have people reading those diaries. We try to be as creative as we possibly can in order to make an impact on our audiences. And you know that particularly school children of 14, 15 years old, they're used to short sound bites, and then they find it quite difficult to listen to a one person speaking without anything else to distract them. And we try to buy into that, if you like, by using everything at our disposal to make sure that they are gripped by what we say. And we have very high standards. We have a wonderful technical advisor, Simon Waxman, who's been with us since the beginning, who actually helped me develop my presentation about 8 or 9 years ago, under the auspices of the London Jewish Cultural Centre, which no longer exists. And he's fantastic, and he helps all our speakers to incorporate film, video, testimony, whatever they have, in a really accessible way, so that we can make that really powerful impact. And the response we get from our audiences is amazing. I mean, we really do get through to those kids. They are really drawn in by what we tell them, because it's the story of one person, my mother or his father or whoever it is. And because we have that direct link, and we knew that person as we were growing up, we have, if you like, that sense of authenticity about what we are saying. So really, you know, we use everything that we've got, all the tools at our disposal, and we work really hard to make sure that we present in a really professional way We have a lot of training. We don't allow any of our speakers to go out and speak to the public until they've passed a series of very rigid assessments, quite stringent. First, you have to present to our committee, and then if they're happy with what you are saying, you will then go on to present to an external panel, which is made up of committee members, people who have some knowledge of the Holocaust, our wonderful historian, Dr. Jamie Ashworth, who checks all our facts to make sure that we are absolutely accurate. Young people are also on that panel because we want to test it before it goes out with young people. I know I've brought in my own granddaughters to be assessors as well. And that's really important, that they should be engaged by it, because that's a really good test of whether it's going to go well for the general public. So we are very stringent in how we test our speakers before they're allowed to be let loose, if you like, on the public. So this is how we ensure that the product we put forward is something of high value, which will remain in the minds of those who hear it.
Thank you. Claire, can I ask you a slightly different question? Given your activity is much more, as you said, digital, digital is a very crowded space. So how do you make room for yourself and get a hearing out there when there's all that, or everything else out there?
Well, it's a combination, because though we are digital, that we're constantly invited into schools as well. So we're going into schools. We've created a mobile exhibition, which is basically a taster of the stories that we have digitally. So in one way, the answer to your question is actually we have a physical presence as well, and going to schools. In addition to that, we've done a lot of really almost groundbreaking things. The most recent of which is a social enterprise has created a comic version of our early history. And that will be presently as a comic online, but it's going to be printed next year and go into libraries and schools and various other places, again, making our name very, very well known. The fact that we're online has been interesting because it's brought people in who've searched their own family's names. So, for example, just last week, somebody from Australia contacted us and said he believes he'd just been typing in his relative's name, discovered us, and we've been able to get in contact with the relative, and they're now communicating with each other. So it's amazing how the digital space connects people through continents as well as everything else. A lot of what we do as well is going into schools. Over COVID, that stopped happening. So we've had a film made of one of the three men. I think I wrote in my bio that I'm a kind of cheat here, because I'm not second generation. I'm second generation by marriage. I'm not sure how that counts. But the six of us who got together, the men are all second generation. And they go into schools. We sometimes, as wives and ex-teachers, accompany them and add to what they're talking about. So that also is very helpful. But over COVID, we've created, so far one, we're going to do a second film, including a lot of material about one of the men's families, Stephen Anson's family, who came from Germany and what happened to them. And Stephen has massive documentation about his family, documentation that people would never have seen normally. And again, that's now available on the web. But what our existence has done has made us very noticeable, oddly enough. So Poppy Scotland, that creates all the poppies for Remembrance Day, has also recently got in touch with us, and they've asked if they could use some of our material to create their own learning pack. And they've picked 3 of the speakers. They're in the process. We've had various conversations with them, but they're getting, they're quite a very noticeable public institution, and they're going to use our material to create their own learning pack. So it's interesting that even though we're digital, we're also digital and real. And recently, we've been putting ourselves on Spotify. You can listen to us while you do the ironing, if you're that inclined. And that's also, very helpful. We've even, I suppose, I should mention also, we've even created a computer game about one of our people who we interviewed. The annoying thing, and the thing that one has to say about digitalization, is it gets old-fashioned very quickly. And that's why we constantly need to get things redone and improved and so on. So our game, it has become almost redundant, which is very annoying because the technology has moved on since then. So there are various things that are problematic digitally, and I really think nothing beats a real person. And one last way that we're very effective. To be honest, I think many school children don't really discriminate between first and second generations, but the fact we're all looking a bit old now ensures that they probably think that we were there in the early 1900s. And when my husband speaks, he has written poetry about the Holocaust and his own family. His mum was in Auschwitz and lost everybody. And we found that the children are so affected by that because it's not a first generation feeling, it's the suffering of the second generation and the feelings of them, and that too is very effective. So a lot of range.
That's very interesting to hear, very innovative. So Ernie, when you, having just set up, right, you had all these, I was encouraged in your introduction when you talked about the support you got from other organizations, from Helen, her organization, but other educational institutions. Were there difficulties as well, or was it actually the difficulty was choosing because there was so much to go for?
From our perspective, we were grateful to have the additional help because unfortunately COVID slowed everything down. If you think of a group of people as we were at the start, we're now more structured, but a group of people face to face would be so much more powerful. Over Zoom, as we use, it also helped. But G2G had a series of protocols or procedures, whatever it may be, and sharing those with us helped us. We've obviously tweaked them to our own benefit or to our own way of doing things. I mentioned before that we have, you can call it a mentoring or a buddying system, and that leads into the accreditation system. Again, as with G2G, no one goes onto our list of accredited speakers with their presentation until they've been through that system. We're also very, very keen to make sure that they have something, even if it's only 0.5% towards the end or whatever it is, relating to some current issue, typically refugees. We think it's so much more powerful that it isn't just the Jews and the Holocaust. Why is it important to go through this? And we are not prescriptive in the way we go through things. What we are prescriptive about is that it has to be engaging and enriching. And as I say, that's both in terms of the content and in terms of the delivery, because both matter. And as Helen has said, in terms of the delivery, we have to use all the tools that are available to us. And PowerPoint is certainly the #1 at the moment, which is fabulous because you can incorporate so much in it. Your parents or someone else's testimony, different voices to break it up, little video clips, photographs, etc., all of which help bring it to people's, to the students' attention. And we do use the word students, by the way, because when you're talking about 50, from our perspective, our target is 15 plus, they are students in the true sense. They're not school children, and you can put, I will call it, a fair amount of adult content. This is not sexual content, but some of the more adult things that can be said and have to be said. We also find it very interesting because just as much as we have the accreditation process, we are actually quite keen on knowing, particularly from a school's perspective, what they are doing in terms of Holocaust education. I'm sorry to say it, and with my experience of the German Holocaust education, and of course in the UK, perhaps I should say in many instances we're appalled at the standard of Holocaust education in the schools here, certainly in the Northwest. The standard is not very high. There are shining examples of Holocaust education that's done. So in fact, we actually try and encourage the schools to ensure that there is a program, because just having a single, I'll use the word Holocaust survivor, victim of Nazi persecution, without the context and without the teacher being able to take that forward, is to us important that we make sure that the teacher knows what it is, has some knowledge of it themselves. So we try and see from both angles that the school has to appreciate that we are enriching to Holocaust education. The individual stories will help, but they have a responsibility in the school to give more of the context. We help them, if necessary, with questions they can ask, with ways that they can get their students to, in fact, ask questions of us. Some classes, you can tell, the students are very shy, probably because they've not been sufficiently prepared. And so there are various tools to try and get the teacher to realize how to bring questions out, because it's through questions, in reality, that you are teaching as much as through the presentation itself. And as I say, we do like to be cooperative with people, not just with schools, but with other areas in Huddersfield, the University of Holocaust Education, where even older students really appreciate this fitting into a live way, because 6 million is very hard to grasp without individual stories. That is our strength, individual, real stories. And if I can echo Helen and Dr. Jamie Ashworth, fabulous in terms of checking for the historical accuracy of what we do, because Holocaust denial and Holocaust distortion partially relies on people saying the wrong thing with wrong facts. So we are absolutely insistent that it should be historically accurate, enriching, and engaging.
Thank you. Well, I have a load more questions, but I know from Susan that we are already inundated on the chat with questions. So I will stand back for a little bit. And Susan, what have we got?
Hi, I'll just run through them as they've appeared on screens. A lot of comments from people who obviously do speak. Somebody said, we've been told by school children many times that it's easier to ask questions to a second generation speaker, as there's always the fear of upsetting a survivor. So second generation make an equally huge impact on school children as the survivor parents. And you know, that sort of backs up what you've all been saying. Somebody's mentioned the fact that I think it was Helen who spoke about how highly polished the presentations are and professional before you go into school children. Somebody said that they hope that that doesn't lose the sort of impact because it's not being told by a survivor. Perhaps you'd like to comment on that, Helen?
Oh, that's an interesting one. Yes. I hope we don't lose. When I say polished, I mean that we want to present in a really engaging professional way. this is why we train our speakers in speaking, public speaking skills. We make sure that they've had specific training on how to use your voice on Zoom, because there's nothing worse than somebody who's umming and ahhing, or who you can't hear, and who drops their voice at certain points, who really is not getting their message across properly. And you know, we're conscious that this is a privilege that we've been given, to be able to go into schools and to talk to young people in their formative years. And we don't want to squander that privilege. And we need to do the very best that we can. I hope that we're not too polished. I hope that part of our training is that we should sound impassioned and natural, and to bring forward our own sort of deep commitment to what we're saying and doing. So this is not just something that we read off a screen. Our delivery is meant to be delivered with feeling, with great feeling, that this is our personal story from our own family, and we are delivering it from our hearts. And it's not just something we are reading without any connection whatsoever. So that's what we're aiming to do anyway. And I hope it comes over that way.
Really?
Thank you.
If I could just back up what Helen has said, because we look at it in the two ways, the content and the delivery, and the emotion has to come through it. It's also interesting to say that with some people who are developing their presentations, that emotion comes out to a higher level than they've previously thought. And that requires, in the buddying or mentoring, whichever word system that we have, a sensitivity to help them through that emotional state. But hopefully, polished as our presentations are, and we share presentations with G2G and ourselves, that those emotions come through. But it is difficult for some people in developing their presentations, and their emotions come to the fore. That it requires, again, we're lucky with some of our team to help them through that situation. So the emotion has to be there.
Thank you.
Can I just briefly add something? We have a very full training program which goes on all the time. And one of the sessions that we have offered is with a professional to help second generation to talk through their motivation for wanting to do this kind of work, and how they might deal with the emotions that it brings up. Because this is not done coldly. You know, obviously telling your very personal story does have an effect on you. And sometimes it's necessary for you to talk that through with other people and with a professional to help you to come to terms with how best to use those emotions in a positive way. And we do offer training in that area, amongst many other areas.
And that is a very slow, long process to take some people through that emotional situation. And just piggybacking from the earlier conversation, and in those sorts of areas, we would welcome very much more support to help us on these things.
Thank you.
Just Claire wanted to.
Sorry, Claire. Sorry.
I just wanted to add that one of the things we do, which is easier, I think, for second generation, is we go into Strathclyde University every year and speak to all the social science trainee teachers. And I suppose partly, you know, we've got the energy, you know, we haven't mentioned that, but we have got the energy to do these things. And that's very effective, because these are the young people who are going into schools now. And they're all very grateful for the fact that we're indicating where they should look for information and also providing them with information.
Thank you. Susan,
hi. Ernie, probably this comes back to what you were saying earlier about Holocaust education in schools. And someone has said Holocaust education is not that well taught in many schools, and many teachers are not well versed in important facts, according to a recent report. Holocaust Memorial Day, only 40% of schools now commemorate HMD. How effective do you think your work and organisations are, given this depressing background, how we can work to improve it?
Talking of HMD, one of our frustrations, and being the new boys on the block, we've only actually had one HMD, which we have had people talk to, and we've already got bookings coming in for the next HMD, which of course is next January. One of the frustrations from the local authorities' point of view, where they bring schools in, is that you are given a maximum of a 20-minute slot with no Q&A. And that for us is really not particularly helpful. So we try and encourage the Q&A bit, and indeed a longer slot than 20 minutes. We personally think 35 minutes is a good target to go for. But as I say, we do want to go back. When we take a booking from a school, or when we get an inquiry to take the correct sequence from a school, we do like to know a little about the school. We take it on their word. You know, we ask the questions that there is part of a program, and we are also happy to go back, not to do the work for the teacher, we can't, but to give pointers and make sure that they know what the context is, because it's the teacher who's there. I'm going to use the phrase 24/7. I'm sure you know what I mean. We're there for a session on one day. They were there before us, they'll be there afterwards, and we want to make sure that they know how to take this forward, how to integrate it, and the like. So some of the work that we do is in fact back into the schools, and sadly, in the UK, so I'll say in the Northwest, from our limited experience, because we're new on the block, the standard is not as high as I think we would wish.
Can I just add something to that? One of our projects, which is in development at the moment, is that we are producing specific materials for teachers to use around our individual presentations, so that it widens their knowledge of that particular area. I mean, our speakers come from lots of different areas. I mean, lots of different countries. For example, we've got 6 of our speakers come from Germany. I mean, their families do. 2 from Austria, 1 from France, 3 from former Czechoslovakia, 2 from Hungary, and 8 from Poland. So obviously the history is different in all of those countries. And our historian, Dr. Jamie Ashworth, is in the process of developing specific materials that relate to that country and the area that that speaker comes from, so that the teachers and pupils can put that story into a wider context. But this is still work in development. It needs time, it needs money, and it needs a lot of effort. But this is one of the areas that we hope to develop in the future. And this will, of course, help teachers who don't have a lot of Holocaust knowledge to teach really effective lessons, having heard one of our speakers.
Susan, one more question for you, and then I'll wrap up with my
Yes,
question.
I'm going to sort of condense a few comments together. I've got a lot of people on who actually are teachers or ex-teachers. A lot of comments asking if you're still looking for speakers, Helen, and if so, if all of you are looking for speakers, could they contact you? And I have obviously answered yes to those people. Anyone who wants emails of anyone who appears after this event finishes, by all means, email us at AJR, and we will put everyone in touch with each other whilst fulfilling GDPR. Somebody says that, you know, the PowerPoint presentations are very good, but sometimes just talking is a better medium. But obviously in this online situation, we've had to depend on PowerPoint and Zoom. That's sort of one comment. And then just one final comment. If you do have second generation talking, do they just talk about their parents' experiences, or do they integrate how it's affected them in their lives? So I'll leave you with those 2 comments. I'm not sure who wants to answer.
I was going to say,
do you want to answer that one?
The thing is, the power is in fact the emotion that comes through in terms of your own story, but we are also happy to work with, here we've got the Fed, with their equivalent of the My Voices project. And if there's a family member doesn't want to take that forward or can't take it forward, we do have people who will do that. In terms of your earlier comment, if I can just come back, we would very much, I'm sure, by the way, Claire and Helen are exactly the same, welcome people who, with knowledge, who already go out. However, I need to point out that our standard is that we have an accreditation process, and it's obviously for people who do it a much quicker and easier process, but everybody has to go through it to double check that it meets the standard. And certainly at the moment, PowerPoint is good, because if you stand up on your own with no support for 35 minutes, 35 minutes, and we've got people who talk, well, not talk, the presentation is 45 minutes, which is at the longish side. It is a much to do it on your own without supporting material. You really have to have a fabulous, fabulous delivery. And most of our people are not trained actors to be able to do that.
Someone said to me years ago, the thing about PowerPoint is you have to use it as a prop, not a crutch.
Can I just add, in response to the question that Susan mentioned about looking for speakers? Yes, of course, we are looking for speakers. We do have 20 qualified speakers at the moment, but we have a further 24 people who are in the process of training, and another 11 who are kind of taking a break at the moment. Obviously, we want new speakers, but at the moment we are focusing not so much on second generation only, but on third generation, because we feel they are our future. We do have some third generation in training at the moment. We have one fully qualified. So our focus is on third generation, but also on second generation, but not necessarily in the London area. You can see we have the North and Scotland represented here, but there is a very large area outside London where we are very represented in a very limited way. So if there is anybody from outside the London area, whether to the south or the Midlands or anywhere around there, we would be delighted to hear from you if you feel you have a family story that is worth telling and that you would like to tell it. So that's our emphasis at the moment. If we had unlimited resources, we could say, come on, everybody who wants to tell their story. But unfortunately, we are a small organization and we can't say that just at the moment.
So can I just wrap up by, I do my fairy godmother act, and I have 3 wishes. So one for each of you in just a few seconds. If there was one thing you could ask for, what would it be? Because we've got currently 145 people dialed into this. So who knows? There may be someone out there who can make your wish come true. Claire.
Oh, I suppose our wish really is that our work is continued, because unlike London, certainly we're a very much smaller pot to find people to continue things, that we continue to get help from students at the Glasgow Tally. And I suppose the greatest wish is that we make a difference, because sadly we're called in a lot when there's anti-Semitism in schools. That's often what brings us in. And if we could really know that even 20 children are going to be different people after hearing us, that would be a marvelous thing to happen.
Thank you. Helen?
I think I would say that we want to ensure that every school child in the country hears a first or second or third generation speaker during the course of their education, at least once, possibly in primary and in secondary. We want to ensure that young people leaving school understand what it means to be other and have a strongly developed sense of justice and respect for minorities and refugees and persecuted groups. And finally, we'd love to wave a magic wand and have a donor or donors who would give us enough money to expand and to cover the whole country and to do everything that we want to do. So those are our fairy godmother wishes.
And Ernie.
Well, they've been said before in reality, and we also feel a third and subsequent, but obviously third is the key one, is critical. In fact, we've got Hannah on tomorrow as well, who's a member of our leadership team. And we do want to try and make sure we make a difference, because that's the whole thing. And so therefore that the message is up to date. It isn't just the Holocaust that something's added in. We hope that that comes across, and that the standard of education, Holocaust education, here in the Northwest, perhaps nationally, that the teachers improve so that message can get across. And as Helen has so eloquently said, particularly as we've just set ourselves up, a money pot, people who can help us. We'd love to have a treasurer. We don't have a treasurer at the moment. But anybody who would like to make donations and help us, that would be fabulous, because we've got a lot. We are jealous of what Gathering the Voices are doing in Glasgow in terms of their online stuff. And we need, therefore, if someone's got IT skills, to help us with that. So physical help, money help, and let's make a difference.
Well, thank you. Can I just give my personal thanks to you all? I think that's been really, really interesting. Some fantastic work going on, some fantastic ideas. And the thing which is one of my passions is about making sure we're collaborating in this space, because there's more than enough work for everybody to be getting on with. We know through our bitter experience that the work is never done, even though we wish it might be at some point. And therefore, organizations helping each other, sharing experiences, sharing materials, sharing resources is most encouraging. And so I'm delighted that we've been able to have this conversation. And thank you again for being part of it. And thank you for
asking us.
listening.
Thank you for asking us.